Congratulations to the incoming cohort for the Master of Education in Mind, Brain, and Education at UT Arlington. What an amazing accomplishment to be joining this space, and during a worldwide pandemic, no less. It's such an exciting time to be in the mind, brain education space. My name is Danielle Batchelor, and I recently finished a similar program. And I started as a student and then joined the teaching team for a course called the Neuroscience of Learning, an introduction to mind, brain, health, and education. And in that class, we look at how people learn and a lot of aspects of the learning sciences that you're going to delve into in this program. And it spun my head off to be in that learning environment and to start to understand how interesting it is when you can pull together the findings from these different fields when you're looking at a question. So mind brain education is really this transdisciplinary space where we're trying to get away from the siloed method of answering questions in favor of using information at the intersection of these different fields instead, so that we can look at a question through multiple lenses. And this space, this field has developed MBE alongside really exciting developments in neuroimaging. And so questions that, philosophers and psychologists, psychiatrists, many different types of researchers have grappled with for a really long time are now enhanced by our ability to sort of look inside the brain and add that piece of the puzzle. Now, there's so much more to learn with regard to brain imaging and what's really going on in this super complex, really amazing organ, but we now have, we're closer, and so it makes it a really exciting time to be rolling up your sleeves and getting into this MBE space. I wanted to offer one example of the kind of question that you might look at through this MBE framework. So if you were curious about how implicit bias, maybe on the part of teachers or parents, plays into the identification, the diagnosis, and the treatment of ADHD in children in sort of classroom settings, how cognitive bias affects that, then MBE would be a really great model to use to say, okay, what do psychologists say about this, and what do scientists say about this, and what are the educators and teachers and folks on that front saying, and sort of how can we unpack the pieces to this puzzle so that we can improve learning for more people, because that's sort of the goal of this whole journey, is improving learning for more people and learning environments for more people. There's a lot of really big ideas in this MBE space that I get super excited about, and they're all in some ways related to, sort of at the top of the heap is this idea of neuroplasticity, which is really important. The brain gets better and gets good and efficient at what it does repeatedly, whatever it does a lot of, no matter whether that's healthy or unhealthy. And so how does that sort of tie into the process of learning or unlearning something? And the brain goes through this process of tuning and pruning, sort of use it or lose it, that you're going to learn about through this program. And then it sort of leads us to the question, in some ways in MBE, about nature versus nurture versus free will. What has to do with your genes? What's related to your choices, or epigenetic expression? If you adopt a growth mindset, how does that affect the neuroplasticity in learning that you experience? And so there's this really intricate relationship between nature, nurture, and free will. And this is a juicy sort of space, I think, for folks in the MBE program to start to take a look at questions from that perspective. Risk and protective factors. This is a biggie that I encourage you to think about through this whole journey. We each have our own unique set of risk and protective factors, and they are, they can be roadblocks to learning. They can suppress learning, but they can also promote learning, and they tend to come from the same source. So, your family could be a protective factor or it could be a risk factor coming from the same source. And this hugely impacts how we learn and what we retain as we go through life, both in the education system and in the informal ways that we learn as well. There is no cognition without emotion. This one blew my mind when I learned it. Just the notion that you can't separate emotion out. There's no such thing as like, be rational, you leave the emotion out of it. Emotion is inherently part of decision making, and it's part of learning. And learning this for me was really this mind-opening idea, because it helps us start to unpack why it's harder for some people to learn, and how stress might affect the body and the brain, and how social contagion could take flight in a classroom. It's really important for how people remain creative or not. If you get in a fight with your mom and you're a teenager and you're getting out of the car right as you're yelling at each other, and then you're going into middle school and you're supposed to sit for a test, this is really hard on kids, so, and adults for that matter. So this is a really big idea in my mind. Neuromyths. I encourage you to seek out the neuromyths, to correct them when you spot them, to challenge your own assumptions in this space. For example, right and left brain thinking. This has been dispelled. Our brain is made of networks, right? And activities are driven, like reading or writing or speaking. These rely on a network of parts of the brain that recruits from different territories in your head. And while you may have something that you're doing that recruits more from one side of the brain or the other, there's really no such thing as right and left brain thinking, and that really means you're a certain kind of learner or a certain kind of thinker. So I encourage you to sort of consider that throughout. Consider this relationship between mind, brain, and body, inextricable, and very interesting in the context of learning and the brain, formal and informal learning. They've done studies that show that if kids have cardiovascular exercise before they take a test, they do better than the group that didn't have the cardiovascular exercise. It's really interesting stuff. MBE pulls together, it sort of unites a lot of the different theories of learning that you've probably already studied or will continue to study through this journey. And we sort of land as MBE educators in this space of neuroconstructivism. As MBE educators, we embrace neuroconstructivism, in fact, which explains that the brain is constantly sort of designing itself and progressively developing through a gene environment process, both of those, and ontogeny. And it's really this notion of neuroplasticity that's involved. And so once we can start to understand that, it opens up a lot of questions and hopefully some answers around how people learn best, how to improve learning spaces, like I said earlier, how to improve learning for more people, how to address, like, our schools, should they be designed around ages or stages or both? There's just so many questions that MBE space touches on that I can't begin to say them all in a few minutes. But, it's just interesting to think about. The brain cannot not learn. The brain is always paying attention. It just may not be paying attention to what you want it to be, what you want your child to be paying attention to, or your husband or whatnot. So I will leave you with a quote from my mentor, Dr. Tokuhama Espinosa, and she said, all learning passes through the filter of prior experience. I know your learning in this new program will pass through the filter of your own prior experiences, and I hope you just have so much fun. And I have so much energy behind this really juicy, interesting intersection of mind, brain, and education, and I wish you the best of luck in this new journey.